Hello and welcome to our webinar, An Afternoon of Art. I'm George Kendall, editor and publisher at Booklist. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some technical details. Links to today's slide presentation and title list were included in the reminder email you received from Zoom 1 hour ago. To download them, please open that email, scroll to the bottom, and click on the links located there. You can also download the slides and title list by copying the URLs on this screen into your web browser. The audience is in listen-only mode, but we welcome any questions you may have. On the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a section for Q&A. If you have a question or need technical assistance, simply click Q&A and type your message into the box that appears. We will do our best to respond to all tech-related questions, and we'll pass along all other questions to today's panelists so they can follow up with you after the webinar. Last but not least, Booklist offers closed captioning on all webinars. To enable or disable captions on your screen, please look for and click the live transcript icon on the toolbar mentioned above. From there, you can select Show or Hide Subtitles from the menu that appears. If you choose to enable subtitles, you can adjust the size of the captions at any time by selecting Subtitle Settings. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Jacqueline Alcántara, illustrator of Jump at the Sun, the true life tale of unstoppable storycatcher ZORA Neale Hurston. Terry and Eric Fan, authors and illustrators of It Fell from the Sky. Brian Floca, author and illustrator of Keeping the City Going. Scott Magoon, illustrator of CHIRP, Chipmunk Sings for a Friend. Charly Palmer, illustrator of Keep Your Head Up. And Mark Teague, illustrator of Cat Dog. We'll hear a presentation from each panelist, and then we'll move to the Q&A portion of our webinar. First, we'll hear from Jacqueline Alcántara. Jacqueline is the critically acclaimed illustrator of The Field, also by Baptiste Paul, which won the Sonia Lynn Sadler Award. Freedom Soup by New York Times bestseller Tammy Charles, which was named a Kids Indie Next and Junior Library Guild selection. Your Mama by Nonica Ramos, which was a finalist for the Kirkus Prize, and Jump at the Sun by Newbery honoree Alicia D. Williams, which has received multiple starred reviews. You can find her online at her website, JacquelineAlcantara.com, or Instagram @_Jacqueline_ILL, or biking around Detroit, Michigan, where she currently lives. Take it away, Jacqueline.
All right, hi everybody. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm going to take you through a bit of the process and the making of Jump at the Sun, which is a biography of ZORA Neale Hurston, who was a writer during the Harlem Renaissance, originally from Florida, but was kind of made famous by her work collecting a lot of folk tales in the South. So you can go next slide. So this is kind of the image of ZORA that I had right when I started this project. And I didn't know a ton about her, but just from this picture, I kind of wrongly thought that she was probably a quiet, maybe serious, perhaps kind of a stern person. Next. And especially from photographs back in the day, this is ZORA's family. Life just kind of looked really serious. And so kind of going into this project, I kind of wrongly assumed all of those things. So you can go next slide. Realized very quickly that ZORA is just this incredibly vivacious, adventurous, hilarious person, a life of the party type of figure. So right off the bat, obviously my first goal was to really get to know her as well as I could, and to just kind of understand the most important things about her that it was important to show through the illustrations. So you can go to the next slide, and these are just a series of sketches, really starting to just get to know ZORA as best I could, finding as many photographs as I could, sketching them, kind of seeing details in her, her fashion, her look that were kind of important to carry over through portraits of her throughout the book. So next slide. And then, of course, kind of bringing those and going reverse, right? So we have all these photographs of her as an adult, but not so much as a kid. So kind of working backwards and thinking about what she would look like as a kid, as a teen, as a young adult. Next. And so what I kind of noticed, or very quickly noticed, was that hats were a very iconic part of her style. And I loved drawing them, but it was when I was kind of starting my research and reading her autobiography that I think there's a quote on the next slide, if I'm mistaken. We'll say, oh, maybe not. But her dad told her when she was a little kid, "You're always trying to wear them big hats." And when I read this, I really realized that, you know, hats were much more than a fashion statement for her. It was really like a personal statement, because what her dad meant by that was, you know, at that point, hats were big, beautiful hats were reserved for rich white women. And so he was trying to tell her that she was really, you know, stepping beyond her, beyond her lane, basically, and being too bold with the stories that she liked to tell as a little kid, being too bold with just the way she was, what she liked to wear, and her dreams. And so I loved realizing that this detail of her look was really so much more than just, a detail. It was really this constant reminder in her life to break down all those barriers that her father had kind of set her up for. And she went on to wearing many, many, many hats. So the next few images are examples of, I think, some of the final art of just trying to capture her. Well, this one, I'll stop for a second. In the foreground, we see her mom, and she is wearing a big, beautiful hat. And then we have Zora as a little kid, kind of jumping away from her father and towards her mother's arms, because it was her mom that told her to jump at the sun, and you might not land on the sun, but at least you get off the ground. So I thought it was really important to put her mom, and her mother died shortly thereafter. So it was this phrase and this kind of image that Zora kept with her throughout her life that really drove her to, really fighting for her dreams. So the next few images are examples of some of her fabulous hats and trying to capture a big range of her life and personality. So just her beautiful smile, her constant curiosity, her amazing work ethic, and one thing we both have in common is a love of a really good dance party. But I also love in this one, just the movement was so important to her life, to keep moving forward. And so I love this image just also for the fact of just kind of showing, that side of her, the life of the party side, but also just the beautiful movement that she had throughout her life. So the next slide is kind of going back to some of my research. And in addition to really trying to get to know Zora, I thought it was really important also to get to know this place that she was from, that was so central to her life as she started to even move away from Florida, realizing the stories and the oral storytelling was just such a big part of her. So in Florida, I saw, just getting a really great sense of the setting, of the light and the shadow. There was an artist who these sketches are from, named Andre Smith, who had a little gallery there, was an artist back in the day, but they let me look at all of his sketchbooks, and I was able to take pictures of hundreds of his little sketches, which were so awesome to be able to get a really great sense of this place. That there was some pictures because it was a historic town, but still there wasn't that much. So finding all of these little gems was really awesome. And also just meeting the people there was a really important step in the research for me. And it was just really fun. So the next slide is a series of, kind of just sketches from there. And then also additional research I did afterwards, of course, reading her novels. Was able to find a lot of her great plays and typed out, first drafts of some of her books that she wrote. So kind of letting all of these things distill. And kind of thinking what other threads that I wanted to pull throughout the book, in addition to the things that I learned about Zora and everything else. So the next slide is a quote from her memoir again. "The most interesting thing that I saw was the horizon. Every way I turned, it was there in the same distance." And I loved reading this and thinking about the title of the book, and also thinking about the way that Alicia wrote a lot of the pages in the book. That's kind of a conversation between the sun and Zora, and especially in those moments when she has to kind of make a big decision of, you know, jumping yet again, leaving something behind and jumping towards something else. And so the next slide is a bunch of sketches that show, I just kind of was playing with the idea of, you know, changing the perspective between the horizon, the sun, and Zora. And so for all of those pages, kind of as a thread throughout the book, is playing with just that idea and kind of trying to focus in on her. And, you know, also you can go to the next slide. These are some of the final art from some of those pages. So just kind of to play off of the relationship between those two things, because they were huge central themes in her life and in her memoir. And, you know, she just had so many beautiful metaphors for life that she wove in. So it was just a matter of taking those and, you know, expressing them visually, I feel like. But one of my favorites that we just, oh, you can pause there. You know, the way that Alicia wrote it, just like the sun saying, "Hey, you're supposed to be meeting me up here." And so this really playful way that she wrote this, some of these pages was a big part of the way that that idea kind of came to me. All right, so my time is up, but just the last thing that I'll say, there's tons of other details that I hope you guys see as you revisit this book, things that I collaged in. And then the last thing I'll leave is a poem that I found that I absolutely loved. So this is it. And the first stanza of it you'll find on the next slide, which is the very final spread of the book, kind of that I wrote very, you know, small into the background there. So you could take a look and read that. And I hope that you get to see a lot of other little details on your second and third time through that you could share with other readers as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. We will now hear from Terry and Eric Fan. Terry and Eric Fan, collectively known as the Fan brothers, were born in the US and grew up in Toronto, where they studied art and film at the Ontario College of Art and Design. They are represented by Kirsten Hall at the Catbird Agency. Their first picture book, The Night Gardener, was awarded the Dillis Evans Founders Award from the Society of Illustrators, and they recently won the Governor General's Award in Canada for the Barnabas Project. Terry spends his days and nights creating magical paintings, portraits, and prints. Eric has a passion for clockwork contraptions, vintage bikes, and impossible dreams. See more of their work at thefanbrothers.com. Welcome, Terry and Eric. The floor is yours.
Thanks for that introduction. Yeah, we're really happy to be presenting our new book, It Fell from the Sky, today. We'll be talking about a little bit about our process and how we came up with the idea and some of our art process. So I'll start off with some sort of the preparatory work we do for a book, and then Terry will talk about our finished art and our sort of process for making that art. So I think I speak for a lot of writers when I say that the hardest part of coming up with an idea for a story is just that blank page. And so Terry and I have often, in fact, for all three of our books, we've used a illustration that we've done before. There was a standalone illustration. So if you go to the next slide, and this was a drawing we did like 10 years ago. And so for all the books we've done, we usually used an illustration as a springboard for our story. And it's usually sort of an open-ended illustration that seems to have a story around it or suggests a story. And as we sort of go through the process of interrogating that image and asking it questions, the answers we get sort of build the story. In this case, the story that it told us was a story about materialism and greed, and ultimately it developed into a redemption story where the message of the book is kind of the most meaningful things are what you give back to the world. Go through the next slides. The other thing that sort of inspired us is that Terry and I used to collect marbles when we were younger, and we collected them over years. None of them fell from the sky, but some of them did wash up from the sea. We have some sea glass marbles, and they all have these very sort of evocative names like onion skin marbles and Lutzes and lattice core, Benningtons. And most of these are handmade marbles, German marbles. Some of them are almost 100 years old or over 100 years old. And you can generally tell a handmade marble by, it has two rough patches on the poles where it was cut from the cane of glass by the glassmaker, and those are called pontils. So for the book, we ended up choosing one marble, which is the most common marble, which is a machine-made cat's eye marble. And the reason for that was because it's the most recognizable marble. It's probably the marble that everyone grew up playing with and recognizing. And so that seemed like it would be something that a child could drop into a garden. And it also resonated with the theme of sort of seeing something ordinary in a new way and finding wonder in that. So the next stage, once we sort of had our story, was to start doing sketches. So if we could, every book we do starts with rough sketches, just to try to find our way into the world and the characters. So if you can just go through those. So we just do very rough sketches, find the characters and the sort of visual style. And after we've sort of done that for a while, we start working on what's called a rough dummy. And the rough dummy is basically the entire book in rough form. And that's when it really sort of starts solidifying the story and the images. If you go to the next slide and the next one. So this is the whole rough dummy. And it's a great way to sort of, to sort of step back and see it holistically. So you're seeing the page turns and the compositions. And that's really, once we have, there's usually a few drafts of that, we submit a rough dummy and we'll get some notes back from our editor and art director, and usually do a few passes on the rough dummy until we're sort of happy with the page turns and how the story is pacing out. And after that, we go to start our final art. So Terry, if you want to take
All right, okay. Yeah, so our final art process is basically we will both work on finished elements. And we usually, work in traditional methods with pencil and sometimes pen. But in this book, we also did quite a bit digitally. So we experimented with that, but a lot we still did in pencil. So what we do with that is we'll scan the images in high resolution, and then we'll import them into Photoshop. So when we go into Photoshop, we work in layers. So this gives us a lot of flexibility. So and in this one, if you could go back to that for a sec. Yeah, so that just shows you the different the types of experimentation we can do in Photoshop, because we can swap out different marbles and change the colors, which we experimented with a lot. And that's what's great about the digital part of it, is that we can have that kind of control manipulation, and it's not that hard to change. Instead of doing a whole new drawing, we can just change the colors on Photoshop, because everything is on its own separate layer. It's like layers of a cake, kind of. For a lot of people are familiar with Photoshop, but that's a really great tool. So if you go to the next slide, this kind of shows how we build up a scene. So we often start with just for spread the background image, and if you go to the next slide, and so you can cycle through these slides, and it shows you. So each of these elements is on its own separate layer and has probably been drawn separately. And in this way, we can really fine tune it, because each of these characters can be moved around in a scene. And here's another example. So you can scroll through this in the book. So as you can see, there's so many different elements, and these Photoshop files we have often have hundreds and hundreds of layers, of different layers that we slowly build up, and we both work on them. We both, have a file sharing program that we use, Dropbox. So we can both work on the files at the same time, and see what the other person is doing. So that's always very useful. So now these next slides are just some interior spreads from the book, the finished the artwork. So as the spider said, thank you very much for listening to our
Thanks,
presentation.
everyone.
Yeah, hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Terry and Eric. Next up is Brian Floca. Brian is the author and illustrator of the acclaimed picture books Locomotive, winner of the Caldecott Medal and a New York Times bestseller, Moonshot, The Flight of Apollo 11, and Lightship, each a Robert F. Siebert honor book. He is the illustrator of numerous additional books, including Avi's Poppy series. You can visit him online at brianfloca.com. Thanks for joining us, Brian.
Thanks, George. Thanks, Grace. Thanks, Amy and Simon and Schuster. Very happy to be here. Happy to be here in good company. I didn't think I would be able to figure out how the slide advancing was going to work, so I sent in a video. So I think I just want to say thank you to everyone for being here, and thanks for the chance for me to be here. And you can hit play, Grace. Thank you. Keeping the City Going is a picture book about the early months of the COVID-19 pandemic, meant to be both a kind of time capsule, and I had hoped it would feel more like a time capsule by now than it does, and an acknowledgement of and thank you to essential workers and healthcare providers who, while the rest of us stayed indoors to stay healthy last spring, stayed out in harm's way, doing what was needed to get us through this crisis. What started me on the path to making the book was really just walking the streets of my neighborhood in Brooklyn last spring, a neighborhood where I've lived for 20 years, and feeling like I barely recognized the place. Overnight, it seemed to have shut down, emptied out, and become a place of just tremendous uncertainty. It was kind of like waking up in an Edward Hopper painting. And I like Edward Hopper, but I don't like Edward Hopper that much. And so one of the things I was doing just to stay oriented in a way was taking a lot of walks and making drawings of things that I saw on my walks. And initially, some of these drawings were maybe a little depressing. And then one day I turned a corner and I saw a driver and a delivery truck. And I drew that driver and truck, and I started drawing the other workers, drivers, and trucks that I saw still out making the rounds, because not only do I enjoy drawing these things, but suddenly in this new context, in this pandemic context, these people and trucks had taken on, for me, a new meaning. The presence of these people and trucks was testimony that this city, however deeply wounded it was still functioning. Now, around this time, I began to see other authors and illustrators make videos of readings of their picture books available online. And I began to wonder if there might be a video I could make that would feel like a reading of a picture book about what we were actually going through, even if that book didn't really exist. In the industry, I believe this is called straight to video. And yet the more I worked on this video, the more I began to wonder if I hadn't sort of backed into making a book after all. I sent a rough draft of what I had been working on to Caitlin Bluey at Athenaeum, Simon Schuster, and this was the first book I'd submitted to Athenaeum since my editor and friend Dick Jackson passed away in October 2019, and so it was the first book proposal I'd sent to Caitlin, and so I didn't quite know what she would think of it, and so I was grateful when she saw possibilities in that very rough draft. And then as soon as she started sending me notes back on that draft, it was immediately clear to me the project and I were going to be in very good hands. Very quickly, we then looped in Michael McCartney, who was the art director for Lightship, Moonshot, Locomotive. And so we had our team, and then we were off to the races. One of the first things we discussed was whether these very simple drawings I'd made for the video would want backgrounds in the books. One of the interesting things for me about that was that for past books, I've looked for reference material for these kinds of drawings at old photos, or I've gone to museums, or for Locomotive, I drove across the country, I drove the transcontinental route. For keeping the city going, the heart of the research was really just what I was seeing in New York, especially what I was seeing walking the 1.5 miles between my apartment and my studio. I got very interested in trying to get the details in these drawings right. I think young readers like details, and I like details too. So here is a DSNY sanitation truck, for instance, and I will say that my studio in Brooklyn is near the Gowanus Canal, which is an old industrial canal and a Superfund site. And one of the great things about having your studio near a Superfund site, one of the great things, is that you have easy access to things like Department of Sanitation depots. So whenever I had a question about any of the knobs or anything I was trying to draw on the garbage truck, I could just walk 2 blocks over and take another look at the trucks. In the end, of course, the people driving these trucks and the people doing this work are the most important part of the book. And one of my deepest hopes for the book is that the book might feel meaningful to those people and to the families of those people, the people who do the kind of work depicted in this book. For young readers, I hope it's a book that they will want to read. That always has to be the first thing you hope for a book, that it holds a young reader's attention. And then also I have in mind something that Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers, was told by his mother, that when something terrible is happening, quote, always look for the helpers. There's always someone who is trying to help, end quote. And during this terrible year and a half, there were and there are so many people we can now recognize as helpers. And they were all around us, and they are all around us still. And that awareness and recognition is something I hope I personally carry forward from this year and from making this book. And I hope it's something the book might help young readers carry forward also. Closing, I'd like to say thank you to Caitlin, Michael, our production manager, Elizabeth Blake Lynn, and everyone at Simon & Schuster. I've always known making a book is a team effort, but I appreciate it just a little bit more with each book, and I appreciated it a lot more with this book. What this team did in order to help us make a book in this environment and at this pace was incredible. And I'd like to say thank you to the librarians and teachers who worked and are still working under extraordinary circumstances to support young people and to connect them to reading and to art. All of us who are lucky enough to work in this field are grateful to you for the connections you make between our work and the young readers for whom we do the work. And I hope you find in this book something that might help start conversations with young people wherever they live about this past year and a half, about the work we do for each other, about our interconnectedness, and about the work that keeps any community going. Thank you. Keeping the City Going is a... Once was enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Our next panelist today is Scott Magoon. Scott has illustrated many critically acclaimed picture books, including the New York Times bestselling Rescue and Jessica by Jessica Kensky and Patrick Downs, which also received a Schneider Family Book Award, Straw by Amy Krauss Rosenthal, and Misunderstood Shark by Amy Dykman. He is the author-illustrate of Breathe, which was named a Kirkus Review's Best Read Aloud and a Best Book of the Year by HuffPost and Chicago Public Library. He's currently writing and illustrating a new graphic novel series called The Extincts, and it will debut in March. He lives in the Boston area. Take it away, Scott.
Hey, thank you very much, George. Thank you, Grace. It's great to be here with everybody. I am flattered and honored to be here. I too made a video. I figured it would be better if I could sort of move through my slides, my drawings, my time-lapse videos in a video format. So Grace, roll tape. Hi there, Scott here. Welcome to my studio. It's my pleasure to join you all there today, however virtually, for the Booklist Afternoon of Art. In Jamie Swetson's CHIRP, Chipmunk Sings for a Friend, a chipmunk longs for a friend who will sing for her. She sings songs of happiness, songs that are bittersweet, and songs that are very sad indeed. Ultimately, it's her song that brings her companionship and moves her forward. Making art, expressing oneself, makes her friends. Personally, I love this idea, and it was one of the reasons Jamie's manuscript really spoke to me. I saw myself in Chipmunk, and I hope other readers do too. As I started to plan out the book and started to think about sketching it, I started to turn my attention to the characters first. And with a chipmunk, raccoon, and moose, I felt that I could solve the character design pretty well with some sketches and time. The challenge of this book, though, was going to be how do I capture, the song/music/sound, chipmunk songs visually to communicate happy, bittersweet, and sad emotions. I knew the songs would sort of become characters as well, in addition to the animals, or at least express themselves as non-speaking characters would, which is by way of their design, color, shape, texture, and size. For this book, I figured I could really use a little bit of synesthesia. That's the experience of one of your senses through another. Synesthesia is when you hear music but you see a shape, or maybe you hear a word and see a color. So for example, you hear the name Steve and you see an orange, or you might read the word bridge and taste pickles. Artist Wassily Kandinsky is said to have this gift. His blobby forms with these amorphous outlines appear in his paintings, forms that kind of resemble these microscopic creatures, but they're really meant to express his emotions. And he intended for these forms, which he would lay out with some sense, to somehow connect and resonate with the observer. Could I do something like that with CHIRP? Surely, my previous work captured intense emotion, including Ugly Fish by Carol LaRoe, Rescue and Jessica by Patrick Downs and Jessica Kensky, Breathe by me, the Balloon Books even, by Ariel Bernstein. But this CHIRP is different. This was music. This was all the emotions wrapped up in that music. Some were even mixed, like Bittersweet, her Bittersweet song. First things first, like clearly telling the story. What kind of page design space would I have need to work in these songs? To figure that out, that meant taking the manuscript and splitting it up into InDesign layouts, something I've done many times as a former book designer and now as an illustrator. I did that. I put all the text, broke it up in InDesign. So I had a full turning dummy, blank except for the text. I exported those InDesign layouts as thumbnails with text into Procreate on my iPad, where I'd sketch super basic thumbnail sketches to get that basic layout. Incidentally, this is the first time I had created entirely on iPad with an Apple Pencil. First book. Other books I've used, my Photoshop here on my Mac, always digital, but never on my iPad. This was a first. Anyway, so then I take those sketches into InDesign, enlarge them to 100%, exported those back into Procreate. And it's there where I then added more detail, kind of fleshed out those early thumbnail sketches, and adding more and more detail. Fortunately, as I was working on these characters, I found there was no shortage of chipmunks in my backyard. In fact, check this out. I saw this recently, this little scene. This is in my backyard. Couldn't believe it. Essentially recreating my CHIRP cover. But beyond all that, this is where I really started to play with what the songs could look like. I started with chirping hash marks, kind of like you'd see in a bird call chart in one of those North America Guide to Birds or a bird guide book. Then I shared those more final sketches with Sylvie Frank, editor, and Chloe Folia at Paula Weissman Books. They had some great suggestions, but for the most part, they gave me the thumbs up. Not everything made it into the book. This spread, we felt, was starting to look like my backyard. Too many chipmunks. And so we cut back to depicting just the music, as you can see here.
Working on the swoosh here, the song, getting lots of color, contrasting color, energy. Moving on to how I drew Raccoon, you can see that there's still some experimentation I do with gesture and how the raccoon is, holding up his arm. Some of the line work is still in play. Chipmunk, just kind of had fun playing with Chipmunk there, laying in the line work with the, actually I think it was a calligraphic brush that I used in Procreate. Here I wanted you to see how I'm trying different blending modes for the song. You can see it's almost translucent in that mode. It's kind of purpley in that mode. Just going through the list of different blending modes that Procreate affords me. And kind of deciding on one there. Adding sparkles to the song, giving life, giving some magic, giving some energy there. I'll make notes too as I work on my drawings right on the artwork so that if I put it down and come back, I know what I have to do still, and I can just remove those sketches, those notes later, thanks to layers in Procreate. Working on the teeth, in case you thought a moose had big teeth. We took them out actually. And there we go. There's the final piece of illustration.
There's much more of this process up on my website at scottmagoon.com if you'd like to check out some rough sketches there. CHIRP is just beginning as a book. It's just getting out there. I've had a few virtual and in-person events reading CHIRP. They've loved it. It's been a great read aloud. I even get listeners to chirp along with me. It's great. It's great fun. I hope you'll check out our book, and I look forward to other readers discovering CHIRP. Thank you for watching, and chirp, chirp.
Thank you so much, Scott. Next up, we'll hear from Charly Palmer. Charly, a graduate of the American Academy of Art, is a nationally recognized fine artist whose work is in private and public collections, including those of McDonald's Corporation, the Coca-Cola Company, and Vanderbilt University. His illustrative work for Mama Africa earned him the 2018 Coretta Scott King Illustrator of the Year Award. Palmer's art is inspired by his children and grandchildren. He lives in Atlanta, Georgia. Thanks for joining us, Charly.
I see I'm in the dark. Maybe I'll adjust that a little bit. Thank you for the introduction. First of all, I wanted to applaud all these incredible illustrators. What I'm seeing here is so inspiring. And I know that it will affect or inspire me to do something a little bit different next time. But let's talk about my book. It was a pleasure doing this book through Simon & Schuster and Milner Books. I understand, I think that Aaliyah King NEALE, this is her first written children's book. And so how I typically handle something like this is I receive the manuscript and I read it. And I read it a couple of times because I'm trying to see, does it resonate? Does it speak to me? Do I recognize the characters or character? And so that's the first thing I did. And then I'll go back to the manuscript and I'll start breaking down how many pages it might need. A lot of times I kind of start wondering how I should break it up, what will the framework be like? But I have to keep going back to the original words because, of course, a children's book is dictated by, the writing, and that's where the inspiration comes from. Next. So I quickly sit down and I start doing a lot of thumbnails. I start sketching out to kind of figure out if I have an idea of what the main character, in this case, the young man's name is D. And so D is just having a bad day. And it happens to all of us. Too often is misunderstood as a badly behaving or terribly distracted child. And what it really is we have bad days. And so keeping your head up is really about that experience. And fortunately, the adults around him recognizing that might be the issue. So then I do the quick sketches. And then what I do is I start looking around, sometime around the street, because now I have an idea of what this young man looks like. And I have to see if I can find him somewhere. When this young man came into my studio for the photo shoot, I knew for sure that this was going to be my D. And so you see the photographs here. Of course, I pull reference on whatever I might be doing. Some of them I might Google, but then very much when it comes to the main character, it's going to be some form of photographs. I have a preference when doing full color illustrations or paintings to work with black and white photographs. Next. And so you'll see, because a lot of it takes place in a schoolyard, in a playground, I had to pull a lot of reference sources from a couple of different places. But I play with the lighting, I play with the perspective in the composition, and then I start to go in and start putting in some detail. Next page. Okay, I know it's fun because I looked at several books on Norman Rockwell and how Norman Rockwell would express in his face and try to indicate and communicate to whoever the model might be a certain kind of action. And so it was fun to kind of do that with these young people. Next page. So this is the cover as I imagined it. It's D going to school and he's not in a bad mood. His day has started pretty bad. And what you'll notice when you go through this book is you'll notice there are clouds everywhere, and the clouds above D's head represents, the day getting worse. So you'll notice as you're reading the story, as the day continues, it continues to get worse for him. But this is how I do a rough sketch, and this is usually what I'll use to get my models. Next page. So the young man that was my D was a little slender than I would prefer. So what I did was simply take the photographs after I printed them out and distorted them slightly. Next page. So that's my D, that's his clouds. I really love the idea of the expression of paint. I have played with Procreate, but being a traditional illustrator or artist, I love something about the experience of the paint itself. I prefer to work in acrylic because acrylic is easier to control, and there's a lot I can do to manipulate it and move it around a lot. So this is the cover for Keep Your Head Up. Next page. Just to kind of explain to you again, it's like I begin to imagine what the young man looks like and what his bedroom may look like. And so these are the sketches that I submit to the publisher and the editor to give them an idea of the direction I'm going in. Next page. The idea of a cloud started very early. So you see in this particular scene, there is a little cloud. He probably just woke up on the wrong side of the bed. But trust me, as you read the story, you'll discover as the day progresses, it just seems to get worse and more challenging. Next page. I played with, I wanted to do something with kind of a frame-to-frame comic book, and that's where that initial sketch comes from. It's a close-up of his eyes, the tension in his mouth, and then a fist about to bowl up. He's trying to control his temper at this point, but at this point, also the cloud is getting bigger. Next page. So this is what D looks like when he's about to explode. He has reached a point where he almost can't handle it anymore. This was fun, like most of the journey in this particular story is trying to imagine who is this child, this young man, and what is he going through? And so I played with that a lot when it came to lighting. I wanted to not go as detailed as I would normally do, but not too loose. I'm really, again, intrigued and fascinated by how artists, especially ones that are more seasoned, can simplify things with simple strokes. But I do at this point want that cloud to be larger, and you'll notice that's what's going on in this particular page. Next one. Oh, that was it. I'm sorry, I thought I had 3 frames showing the illustration. So it becomes very important, and I kind of made it very clear. I want to tell certain stories, and it's very important to me that the child that I'm illustrating is a Black child. I think what also is important is the idea that it's everyday situations, and it's the kind of experiences that everybody goes through. And that was my emphasis in this thing, was like the idea that keep your head up, don't give up, because it's going to be better the next day. Thank you very much. Again, very inspired, and I'm truly honored to be in the company of these fantastic illustrators today. And thank you, librarians, for sitting in.
Thank you so much, Charlie. Our final panelist today is Mark Teague. Mark is the award-winning children's book author and illustrator of the best-selling Dear Mrs. LaRue series, as well as Fly, The Sky is Falling, The 3 Little Pigs, and The Somewhat Bad Wolf, The Treehouse That Jack Built by Bonnie Verberg, and many other humorous picture books. He also created the art for the How Do Dinosaurs series. His illustrated novel, The Doom Machine, received excellent reviews. Mark lives in the Hudson River Valley with his family. Take it away, Mark.
All right, thanks very much. Today I just wanted to talk about how I illustrate a picture book, and specifically this picture book, which is called Cat Dog, and it's by the great Mem Fox. And really the first thing you need if you're going to take on a project like this is you need a good manuscript. And this one's really good because it's funny and it's full of surprises. And I guess most importantly, it's about a cat and a dog who just are buddies, and they hang out together on the couch all day. And that makes it sort of the story of my life, because generally on a normal day, my dog would be asleep right back there. The cat would probably be asleep on my lap. But this is just kind of how I live my life here. So I figured this book would be kind of easy to illustrate, because normally the first thing you do in an illustration project is you have to do your research. And in this case, my research basically consisted of looking over there. So I thought that you know, this was going to be an easy project. The main thing that I had to do, though, and the challenge of the book, is that because the stage is so small, it's just basically a couch, that everything depends on the characters. And so I had to make sure that my characters were fun and engaging, and that they interacted well with each other. So that was really where the project started for me, was paying attention to the characters. I'm going to switch to slides right now so you can see what I'm talking about. So here's my characters are kind of ready made for me. That's my dog Lulabelle, and the cat is Kitten Jr. And they're quite excellent as characters. My only criticism of these two, it's not personal, it's aesthetic, is that they're both gray and white animals, and I thought that the book needed a little bit more color than that. So I changed Kitten Jr. into an orange tabby cat. And that meant I also changed the color of the couch. I don't know if you noticed before, but the couch in my studio is red. I changed it to green because that goes well with the orange. And that's actually sort of my main contribution to my main innovation in this story. There is one other character that shows up in the book, and that's a mouse. And I didn't have a mouse handy, so fortunately I have this guy. This is my dog Guillermo, and he's not literally a mouse, but he worked well enough for my purposes. So my very first step now is I'm going to start doing the sketching of the characters, and I've got sketchbooks full of this stuff at home, and it's simple stuff. These are really small drawings, but this is just where I'm learning my characters and just practicing, trying to see what works. I just want to draw your attention to about midway down on the left is a dog lying on her back with her head on a pillow. And that's the first picture I drew that I think I really liked. And I'm drawing your attention to it because you're going to see it repeated through this process until we get to the final art. And the process goes on. Usually if I like something, I'll just circle it. And that means that I can go back to it later when I'm working on the finals. Here I'm working on the mouse, kind of doing a dance routine. I finally found one I liked and circled it. And then the next step in the process is I'm just paging out the whole story. So I've broken down the manuscript and figuring out where I want everything to go and what's going to happen page by page, kind of like a storyboard. Once again, there's our dog down at the bottom with their head on the pillow. So I'm working that into the story. What's really, really important in a picture book is the page turn. Every time you turn a page, something interesting has to happen. I always think of it kind of like opening a present. You want to have that anticipation that something good's going to happen, and then be satisfied when it does. And Mem does a great job with this in the written part of the book, but it's sort of my job to match that in the art. And so a lot of this is just making sure that something different, something really moves in the art every time you turn a page. The other thing that's great at this stage in the book about working this small is that it allows you to really see the composition, the main lines that are just going to kind of carry the story. When you work bigger, you can kind of lose that in the details. So this, I think, helps me keep the art kind of bold and simple. And now at this point, I'm ready to do the dummy book. And this is the whole book. You've seen a couple of them already today, but they're just done out in sketches. This is where I'm working with my editor and the art director. This is a chance for them to weigh in and offer any sort of suggestions or comments. It's much easier for me to change art at this point when I'm just changing sketches than when I've actually done the paintings. And here again, you see that same image again showing up. And now it's once the dummy has been approved, it's ready to go to the final art. And so this is one of the paintings in the book. And it's an acrylic painting. It's done on watercolor paper. The basic technique is that I work from dark to light in terms of color and tone, and also from thin to thick. So I layer up the painting with a lot of thin layers of paint. This I do this basically because acrylic paints tend to go kind of flat and be kind of dull when they come straight from the tube, and layering them up like this I think makes the color more lively, and it just it makes it more translucent. You can see the brush strokes. It just makes the painting more interesting that way. So anyway, I do this process over and over. Each painting takes 3 or 4 days, and then the whole project takes me about 3.5 months to complete. And so that's how I do a picture book. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. We will now move to the Q&A portion of the webinar. So I invite all panelists to turn on their videos, and I'll turn on my video, and we can begin. So we've broken down the group of authors and illustrators into two groups for the questions, and we have one group, one question for each group. So I'm going to start with Jacqueline, Scott, Charlie, and Mark. And the question is, what was working with an author's existing text like for you? And anyone can jump in and answer.
I'll start. It's always fascinating to work on something where you're reading the manuscript, but you're not actually meeting the author. And that's kind of been my experience so far. And it's always rewarding when the author gets it. And it may not have actually met her expectation, but it speaks to her in another, and she sees the characters differently than she may have originally imagined it. But it's always kind of like, I find it to be a challenge, but I also find it to be kind of an enjoyable climax when she or he, the author, sees the work.
Thank you.
Yeah, I enjoy it very much. It's kind of it's like getting to borrow someone else's imagination. So I find that I'm doing things when I'm working for another author. I find that I'm doing things that I wouldn't have thought of myself, and so I feel like these kind of projects kind of extend my range a little bit, and just kind of open up my imagination. Something I really enjoy.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I agree. And I love the opportunity to dive deep into a person or a subject or a story that I just wouldn't have done otherwise. It's so enjoyable to be able to learn about, just subjects and cultures and people that you were a little bit familiar with before, but, over the course of really working on a book and a biography like Jump at the Sun, it's just an incredible process. And I think that it's really fascinating to kind of see through the decisions that the author made about what to include in the manuscript, and then doing my own research on the subject, and then kind of going back in and figuring out what else I can add to from my own personal research. What else can I build off of the manuscript to include? But yeah, I love it.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Scott?
Yeah, I agree with all of that's been said, especially the part about borrowing someone else's imagination. But beyond that, I think for me, I worked in an office as an art director for years, and I had coworkers around me all the time. But since I've gone freelance and now I'm working here in my studio, it's such a solitary thing. So authors are sort of my coworker concentrate in a way. I don't have a whole lot of interaction with them usually, but the ones that I do, it's so meaningful. We put out this little child into the world that is a book, and we just have to share a special bond. I love that bond. It never goes away. At least it hasn't for me. I've worked with some amazing authors. I've been so blessed, and I'm just so grateful for it. And it's wonderful working with another person's imagination.
Thank you so much, and thanks to all for that question. The next group is Terry, Eric, and Brian. And the question for you is, you all acted as authors and illustrators for your books, but did one creative element come before the other, or were there continuous edits made on both sides throughout the process?
I guess I can jump in because we sort of went over that a bit in our presentation, that for the 3 books we've done, we always start with we think visually. So we start with the visual image, and that's usually the springboard for our story. So we always have some kind of illustration, either one we've done, some of them have been illustrations we've done 10 years ago, and they sort of stayed with us, and you feel like there's a story around that image. And then when you're sort of searching for ideas, sometimes you go back and look at one of those old illustrations, and it inspires you to write a story. So that tends to be our process.
Yeah, and having said that, when we actually do start developing the story, there are sort of continuous edits made throughout the whole process, back and forth, and one sort of influences the other. I think, yeah, it always tends to start with a strong image and then a standalone image and that suggests a story to us, and then we expand out that story. But then there's a lot of editing that happens afterwards, like fine tuning and you know, generally we think very visually, but then again, you know, sometimes the text will influence the visuals and vice versa. Sometimes, yeah, we end up cutting out text when we realize that the visual is already telling the story and the text is sort of redundant. So yeah, it's a very kind of back and forth process.
Thank you. Go ahead.
And I would just say there were a lot of things I recognized in the first round of answers from working with other authors that I would also echo, especially what Jacqueline said about spending time with a subject that you weren't totally familiar with and getting to sort of do that kind of deep dive. But I guess then the fun thing when you're in the other category and you're writing and illustrating both is you can sort of control the complete architecture of the book. And for me, everything is kind of knotted together and sort of anything can happen at any moment, which keeps things interesting, especially when the deadlines are close.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all so much. This was a real pleasure for me. And I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Thank you all so much for your wonderful presentations and taking the time to speak with us. We'll close out the webinar with a few book list announcements. Tomorrow, all attendees will receive an email containing links to today's slide presentation, title list, certificate of completion, and video recording. For more about book list webinars, be sure to visit booklistonline.com/webinars, where you can view archives of past webinars and register for upcoming ones like those you see here. Not yet a subscriber? Pair the print reading experience with the convenience of online access at booklistonline.com and lock in print, online, digital, and archive access by taking advantage of this special webinar offer to get Booklist for only $75. And patron-friendly, librarian-approved, and free with a Booklist subscription, Booklist Reader, Booklist's new digital-only magazine highlighting diverse readers' advisory recommendations for all ages, launched September 7th and is currently free and open to all. To read the latest issue, visit booklistonline.com/reader-issues. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. One more huge thank you to our panelists and our sponsor, Simon & Schuster Children's Publishing. This concludes today's webinar. See you next time.